The year 2000. As the world celebrated the dawn of a new millennium, paleoanthropologists unearthed what is currently known as the oldest human fossil, dating back approximately 6 million years ago. This predates the Australopithecus and Homo habilis we often see in textbooks, and this species was named Sahelanthropus. The primary reason for classifying it as a human ancestor is its possession of one of humanity's most crucial characteristics, bipedal locomotion. If you think about it closely, you'll realize that this bipedal, upright posture has been an almost exclusively unique characteristic of humans throughout hundreds of millions of years of animal evolution. Some might disagree, thinking, I don't think bipedalism is that rare, aren't the chickens my family raises also bipedal? The difference lies in their posture. While many ornithischian dinosaurs and their avian descendants walked on 2 legs, their bodies were always leaning forward. Therefore, this form of bipedal walking likely doesn't qualify as true upright posture. One could even say their posture was a mix of standing and crouching. In contrast, the human body, or more precisely, the spine, is essentially perpendicular to the ground. The upper body doesn't lean forward, and the center of gravity and support naturally align in a straight line. This means we don't need a tail for balance or as a counterweight. There's also no need to meticulously adjust the leg structure. This not only significantly reduces the body's burden but also, when walking, humans primarily only need to exert force from their legs. There's no need for a large tail to swing for balance, making it much more energy efficient. So, the benefit of losing weight just by walking a few steps? We don't get to enjoy that. Indeed, the 3 words, bipedal upright walking, strictly speaking, only achieved a complete realization in humans, and subsequently, only among humans did it spark entirely new and fascinating developments. Specifically, because there was no longer a need to consider the distribution of body mass to support the forelimbs, humanity was completely liberated. We could uninhibitedly evolve extremely robust and flexible arms and hands. This enabled the precise manipulation and fine-tuning of tools, allowing for intricate tasks like moving something just 5 millimeters. So, why did such a have your cake and eat it too advantage only happen to us humans? According to textbooks, human bipedalism evolved to adapt to life on the open savannas. Standing up allowed us to see further, appear larger, and intimidate predators. The problem is, animals like cattle, horses, tigers, and wolves have been living on grasslands for tens of millions of years. Why didn't any of them evolve bipedal locomotion? Even when they do stand up, it's often just to hop around like kangaroos, a vastly different style from humans. So, why did none of their evolutionary paths converge with humanity's? Therefore, the reasons for bipedal upright walking likely cannot be summarized by a single factor like grasslands. If we delve deeper into this question, it might reveal that all life in nature arises from countless fortuitous coincidences throughout history. First, let's conduct a thought experiment. Imagine you're the product manager for Earth's evolution department. Could you devise a way for a large herbivore on the grassland to also walk upright, with a straight posture, like humans? You first observe grazing animals like cattle, sheep, and horses. You find that they are all digitigrade or unguligrade animals. To put it in human body terms, imagine a person's toenails growing tens of times larger and thicker, with walking done entirely on the nail, while the toes and foot sole don't directly touch the ground. Not only that, but the bones in their original hands, forelimbs, have become highly simplified and fused, no longer resembling their primitive, many-fingered state. For example, a horse essentially walks on a single digit, its middle finger defying gravity. After this skeletal streamlining, the accompanying joints, muscles, and ligaments also become more efficient. After all, being lighter means less effort with each step. At the same time, there's no longer a need to coordinate the movements of numerous digits, which optimizes a large part of the nervous system and makes it less prone to error. Meanwhile, despite this downsizing to fewer toes, their phalanges, toe bones, and metatarsals, foot bones, have paradoxically lengthened considerably. The metatarsals, in particular, can become nearly as long as a shin bone. If you were to apply this to a human, it would be like having your foot and hand bones, including your middle finger, greatly elongated. That's why, at first glance, it seems their leg joints bend in the opposite direction from ours. Such long legs allow for larger strides, meaning they cover more distance with the same number of steps. On the surface, this seems like an energy-saving strategy, similar to ours. However, the problem is that, as is well known, herbivores generally have a hard time. Because grass often lacks significant nutrition and is difficult to digest, animals like cattle and horses have to eat enormous quantities daily and possess extremely long digestive tracts, making them large and bulky. Once the weight increases, their posture inevitably has to lower. If they were to walk upright on 2 feet, like humans, even slow walking would subject their legs to a load of 2 to 4 times their body weight. If they were to run or jump, the impact force could reach up to 24 times their body weight. Ultimately, upright locomotion has specific demands on an animal's body weight. This also partly explains why our close relatives, gorillas, despite living on the ground and being capable of some bipedal walking, still rely on their knuckle walking. What's worse, the entire weight of these ungulate, hooved animals rests on just 1 or 2 solitary toes. If even 1 or 2 of those toe joints suffer damage, the entire leg becomes useless. So, if these herbivorous animals showed even the slightest inclination to stand up and walk on 2 legs, natural selection would swiftly teach them a lesson. Well, what about carnivores? Their weight generally isn't as exaggerated, and their toes are still relatively intact. Could they adapt to bipedal locomotion? Actually, it's not very convenient for them either. While grassland carnivores don't carry as much bulk, they also have their own form of stilt walking, their elongated metatarsals. Their walking posture largely involves keeping their soles off the ground, moving forward on their toes. They've evolved a broad paw pad behind their toes that serves the function of a sole, increasing the ground contact area. This is known as being digitigrade. This isn't hard to understand. After all, these carnivorous animals spend their days engaged in pursuits with herbivores. This structure not only gives them the advantage of longer strides but also, with claws gripping the ground and padded paws cushioning impact, helps them be more agile and responsive. It makes it harder for prey to simply drift away from them. The problem, however, is that this posture is akin to walking on tiptoes and on stilts no less. If they were to stand up and walk bipedally, their center of gravity would easily shift backward, causing them to fall over. To solve this problem, they'd have to keep their upper body leaning forward and then counterbalance with a large tail. Frankly, this evolutionary path would just turn them into honorary dinosaurs. The pangolins of South Africa would surely empathize deeply with this. Therefore, for these traditional heroes of the savannah, the tech tree for upright walking was already locked. It's fair to say that you hogged all the ecological niches in the mammal family, from the earliest protists to the first ungulates. There had to be some trade-off, right? This shows that bipedal upright walking, at least for us mammals, was not a conventional upgrade path. So the real question should be, what evolutionary moves did humans make to finally stand tall? This story begins with our own evolutionary order, primates. As is well known, primates mostly live in trees. When you're in trees, you need to grip tightly all the time. In that scenario, having more fingers is always a good thing, and this ensured we always retained our original, versatile 5-digit limb structure. Living in trees also allowed us to avoid the life or death struggles of the open plains, meaning we didn't need to develop elongated metatarsals, like the digitigrade plus configuration. In fact, if you look at our various ape and monkey relatives, their feet are shaped like hands. They're essentially covered in grasping appendages. However, this also led to another extreme, since weight was always relatively evenly distributed across all 4 limbs. The strength of all 4 limbs remained roughly similar. Consequently, the strength of the legs alone was often insufficient to sustain prolonged standing. If you can't support your entire weight on just one leg, then even if you manage to stand bipedally, you can't walk. Today, squirrels largely fit this description. They might occasionally stand on 2 feet to nibble something, but walking is out of the question. But we primates, or more precisely, our hominoid ancestors, uniquely chose an evolutionary path rarely taken by other arboreal animals, getting larger. The problem, though, is that tree branches have limited carrying capacity. Any arboreal animal that grows too large would inevitably crash to the ground. Yet, our ancestors were incredibly creative, evolving flexible shoulder joints. This significantly expanded the range of motion for our hands, allowing us to reach and grasp other branches to distribute our weight. Moreover, this hand-foot locomotion enabled incredibly agile movement through the treetops. Honestly, when I was navigating the caves in Hanzhong, I marveled at how remarkably effective this type of combined hand and foot movement was for getting through difficult terrain. This agility led to a variety of tactical movements, one of which was alternating foot grabs on branches to achieve bipedal upright walking. In this process, apes had to straighten their bodies to reach higher branches with their hands, allowing them to quickly grab another branch if one broke. This, right here, was the true precursor to our bipedal upright walking. Therefore, it was only natural for apes to adopt this walking posture once they descended to the ground. However, this posture had a critical flaw: it was too slow. While occasionally venturing onto the forest floor for a stroll was fine, wandering aimlessly on the open savanna meant facing predators that had been honed for speed over tens of millions of years. In such a scenario, one could only say, friends are met with fine wine, jackals are met with fresh meat. Today's macaques and baboons likely suffered from this very disadvantage. On the ground, they had to revert to quadrupedalism and dared not stray too far from trees, so they could quickly scramble back to safety when encountering danger. But with humans, it was different. You see, even looking across the entire history of evolution, humans consistently rank among the top 5 largest primate species. We are undeniably large creatures. This opens up new possibilities. You see, based on the ingrained behaviors of animals on the savannah, they perceive creatures in a certain way. So, when they encountered a large, upright human standing before them, they would subconsciously assume that we were much larger, with a significant portion of our body hidden from view. In short, they would severely overestimate our size, strength, and overall vitality. This meant that smaller to medium-sized predators, which typically rely on hiding in the grass, were much less likely to dare approach us. As for large predators, our ability to stand tall and see far allowed us to spot them early and take evasive action. This excessive caution from predators allowed our ancestors to stand tall and firm on the open land. It's clear, then, that bipedal upright walking is truly a golden legend, something that had only a small probability of emerging. It couldn't evolve if you were too big, nor if you were too small. It couldn't happen if your base stats were too high, nor if they were too low. It couldn't happen if you stayed only in the trees, nor if you stayed only on the ground. You absolutely had to be just right across all these various dimensions, hitting that delicate sweet spot. Did you think that was the end of it? Not at all. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you will. Our ancestors still needed a compelling reason to descend from the trees. And then, Earth provided that reason. About 6 million years ago, during the Miocene epoch, the climate in East Africa gradually grew colder. The continuous expanses of forest began to fragment into isolated islands. Some early hominoids realized that these fragmented, small patches of woodland were no longer sufficient to sustain them. They were forced to periodically traverse the open, flat savannas in search of the next patch of forest. This nomadic lifestyle, crossing grasslands to find new forests, finally compelled our ancestors to take those crucial first steps on 2 legs. The Sahelanthropus mentioned at the beginning might very well be a product of this very lifestyle. Not only that, but the increasing scarcity of forests provided our ancestors with a just right difficulty curve for their long-distance treks. What's more, they periodically had to contend with other tribes after their exhausting journeys. Consequently, the groups that could consume less energy while traveling farther were naturally selected. This led us further and further down the path of energy efficiency. After millions of years of this development, our ancestors finally honed their physiques to be crane-like in gait, capable of walking 5 kilometers effortlessly. Later, they even discovered that the cattle and horses on the savannah, for tens of millions of years, had focused solely on speed, making little progress in endurance. Our ancestors then seized this opportunity, shifting to team cooperation and slow, relentless pursuit to exhaust their prey. Just like that, they became the meta strategy. With bipedal upright walking truly solidified, the fire of evolution finally meant there was no longer a need to climb trees. As a result, our lower limbs could detach from the ancestral grasping form, becoming slightly elongated and stiffer. The shape of our feet began to converge. On this foundation, the bones along the length of our foot also formed an arch, known as the plantar arch. When the foot lands, the arch slightly deforms, absorbing the vertical impact. When stepping forward, the arch returns to its original shape, releasing stored energy. This not only resists impact but also makes walking more energy efficient. However, merely having a suspension system isn't enough. To walk with powerful strides and cover vast distances, our entire body had to undergo a series of modifications. As we mentioned earlier, after upright walking, the impact force on the body in the vertical direction increased significantly. To counter these mechanical loads, simply strengthening and thickening bones and joints wasn't enough. We also needed to learn how to use leverage or absorb shock dynamically. Thus, the human ancestral spine evolved to curve into an S shape. The benefit of this is that it transformed the spine into a natural spring. A curved spine can absorb vertical shock during walking through compression and deformation, protecting the brain and internal organs. However, some adaptations were more challenging, such as the hip joint. To maintain lower limb flexibility for climbing trees, primate hip sockets are generally not very deep. The femoral head isn't fully enclosed by the socket. This prevents the socket from overly restricting the femur's range of motion in various directions. However, during upright walking, the immense impact force could instantly pop the femoral head out of the shallow socket, leading to dislocation. But the problem was, early hominids still needed to climb trees, so lower limb flexibility couldn't be sacrificed too much. Therefore, the hip socket couldn't become too deep. How was this contradiction resolved? This is where our ancestors demonstrated a mature, engineer's mindset. When in doubt, wrap it in tape. Between the upper femur and the pelvis in primates, there's an iliofemoral ligament. In early humans, this ligament was massively strengthened, becoming one of the most resilient ligaments in the human body. A single iliofemoral ligament can support a weight of 350 kilograms. When walking, this super strong ligament firmly pulls the femur, keeping the femoral head securely within the hip socket. Thus, with the help of this ligament's strength, the hip joint's contradiction was resolved with ease. Did early humans become addicted to wrapping tape? You mean the knee joint is too flexible and prone to slipping? Use ligaments to hold it in place. You mean the forces on the toes are uneven, and one might get dislocated by impact? Wrap it tighter with ligaments. It was by relying on this all-purpose tape wrapping that our upright ancestors managed to fix all their walking bugs. In this way, countless coincidences and momentary encounters led humanity down an unprecedented path. So, what brand was this tape whose performance was good enough to correct an eye-dazzling timeline? The key lies in the main component of ligaments, collagen. This protein is truly a unique member of the protein family, as its properties are more akin to a rope made of high molecular weight material, possessing exceptionally high tensile strength. And because it's a protein, it's relatively easy to repair even if damaged. Since cells' daily work is synthesizing proteins, after all. Besides its use in ligaments, humans also produce various types of collagen that fill in muscles, bones, and tissue spaces. They act like sponge cushions, absorbing the shocks from our jumping and running, protecting our delicate internal organs. As a bonus, they also make us look nice and springy. That's all for today. See you later. Remember to like, comment on the video and subscribe to the channel.